Hey YouTube, how's it going? Well, today I want to talk about primers. I'm not going to go into primers and what actually is a true primer or not a true primer, because everything I'm talking about for our purposes in painting miniatures is a primer. Just the first thing you do, first coat of paint or whatever that you put on top of your mini so you can paint over. Be it a base coat that adheres or whatever, or if it's a true primer, it doesn't matter. Essentially are primers. What everyone playing, Warhammer is probably familiar with because they pick it up at the Games Workshop or the stores that sell Warhammer, is the GW primers, Skull White and Chaos Black. They're very good primers. I like them both. White tends to be a bit chalky, but the black goes on very nice, dries very nice, doesn't hide detail. I find it a bit shiny. It's kind of a satin finish, but you're paying about $17-18 a can. Miniature painters are also going to be familiar with Army Painter. It comes in a huge range of colors. It's great if you want to get an army painted up really quick. Say you got a bunch of blood angels or whatever, or something you want to paint green or red or whatever, blood angels, and you can paint red, or dark angels paint green. You can do or salamanders paint a whole lot green, nice and uniform. But as a primer to paint over, I personally don't like it. I find it's too glossy, especially if you're really thinning your paints down. It isn't that great a surface, in my opinion, to paint on. That being said, some people don't have a problem. If you're if you don't thin your paints too much, it will work fine. Something that a lot of gamers use as their kind of first inexpensive choice is Krylon Fusion. Excellent paint. It's a paint for plastic. It works really well. Again, though, for my liking, it's a bit too shiny. The lowest sheen in the Krylon Fusion is satin, I believe. But you're paying $6 a can. It's much more paintable than the Army Painter, in my opinion, but it's still a little too shiny for what I like. And then there's also Rust-Oleum's kind of version. It's their Rust-Oleum Universal. I personally don't like the trigger for it, but it's a trigger spray, but it bonds to plastic quite well, and it'll bond to anything that bonds to plastic will bond to metal. And it works quite well. The flat is, I think it's kind of a satin. It's not a true flat, but it works quite well. Costs a little more than the Fusion. You're looking at about $8 a can, $9 a can. The Fusion's only $6 or $7 at Walmart or some home supply places. The primer for plastic that I really like to use, though, is Rust-Oleum's primer for plastic. It's just, as far as I know, it just comes in white. It also comes in a brush-on. Brush-on's a bit thick, and you can't really thin it. But this primer for plastic is awesome. Just one word of caution when using it: you got to shake it really well, and the temperature's got to be, and I find for painting minis, at least 15 degrees Celsius. Otherwise, you can hide detail. I haven't had a problem with it once I kind of figured that out, because I don't have problems with it hiding detail. It just has to be a warm day, and as long as the can's shaken well, it's not a problem. This is a Chaos Space Marine that I primed with that. Let's find a good focus. And I have found that it does not hide detail at all, and it's a really nice primer. Another thing but one primer that I'm really liking, that you can kind of paint up an army fairly quick in, limited number of colors though, is Krylon's Camouflage Paint. It's ultra flat, really nice surface to paint on. I've got a can of beige or sand, kind of camel green, brown, and flat black, or they're all flat, and black. And this is it is a really nice finish. Very flat. Does not hide detail. Missed a couple spots on that wheel, but it is a very nice flat. And it dries very tight, and you don't lose any detail in it. I have to say, this is probably my favorite primer right now, aside from the white Rust-Oleum, because if you want to do something in those colors, it works out great. And you know, it's only about $6-7 a can. The primer I like using for metal minis, you know, you can get your red oxide, your gray, and your white primers that are kind of used for metal. Like, this is an automotive primer. You're only going to use these on metal primers or on metal minis, because they'll totally eat the plastic ones. But it dries really flat, does not hide detail. It stinks. It's terrible. It's definitely, you don't want to use this stuff inside. But it covers metal minis very well. And you know, one of the biggest complaints people have with metal minis is that you bang it on something and the primer flakes off. I find that, you know, it doesn't even scratch off. You can scratch and it stays on. This is and it doesn't hide detail, as I mentioned. This is a dwarf long beard that I've got. And as you can see, there's lots of detail in these dwarf minis. Has not filled the chainmail whatsoever, and it looks very nice. Now, if you're saying, "Well, it's not a solid white," well, you don't want to prime your minis completely where there's where it's solid white, because you want to leave some gray show through. Because if you're doing that, you're putting too much primer on. You just have to have a thin coat of primer, and that's all you need. If you want it solid white as an undercoat, then use something like, you know, this Fusion stuff or some other primer for a base coat, or like one of the paints that aren't real, that they're actually plastic paints, not primers. If you're using it as a base coat, use something like this. It's going to be better than a primer in that sense, if you want to have a nice clean crisp white. And the last thing I use as a primer is when if you live in the Great White North, as I do, or in somewhere where it gets cold, you can't go outside and spray your minis for much of the year, so you have to either do that inside, which isn't really recommended health-wise. Breathing in the propellant and spray bombs isn't really healthy. So you're going to brush it on, and there's paints. There's stuff like gesso. This is a canvas primer, but I saw someone on YouTube do it a long time ago, and I had some kicking around. You thin it out about 80% gesso, 10 or 20% water, and that makes it's a good consistency to prime your minis. If you can't go outside and spray, this works well. You can also find it in a spray can as well, but no point in using this for minis, because you have a whole host of other stuff that's less expensive. When it's the concentrate like this, you can it's definitely cheaper, and this costs about $8. Oh, I forgot to mention the metal primers, like the white, red, and gray ones. They run about $6 or $7 a can. Very economical compared to some of the gaming ones out there. I hope this has been helpful, and if you have any primer that you like using, post a video response or a comment, and we'll get back to you, and hope to hear from you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.